Today in the real estate industry, whether you're an investor or an agent, you need to understand that you have to know a little bit about everything. And you'll be able to put together a deal that solves the seller's problem, solves the buyer's problem like no one else can. Once you do one or two or three, you will be an expert, more so than most people in the country. Hello, agents. Welcome to the 9th episode of the One Bite at a Time show, where we go out and find the most relevant information that you need right now for your business, and we bring it to you in small bites at a time. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, and that's how you're going to grow your business. So Roxanne, why don't you introduce what the show's about today?
For this week's bite, we're going to be talking about lease options. And Steve, I know you've done a bunch of seminars on this, and so let's just dive right into it. What's a lease option?
Well, thanks. That's a great question. You know, a lease option is not the least of options. There's a lot of confusions out there. There's a lot of misconceptions about lease options. So what I wanted you to understand is a couple of terms that can be used in place of the word lease option. One of them is buying subject to existing financing. We talk about, there's other ways to do that too, but this is one way, buying subject to existing financing. Another way is just to say seller financing, no bank needed, or seller financing, no mortgage needed. It's interesting, as a mortgage company, we teach every part of real estate that we can possibly find out about, even if it means helping you sell homes or helping your buyers buy homes without the use of a mortgage loan.
Okay, so could you give us a couple examples of why we would use a lease option?
Of course. Let's give you some examples from different points. Let's just say, as an investor, if I were buying a home for, say, $700,000 from a family who's owned that home in their family for 60 years. As an investor, do I really want title to change hands? Well, in reality, I don't. I want to control that property. You know, Warren Buffett used to say, I don't want to own anything. I want to control everything. And the reality is I want to control that real estate. I want to make a profit on that real estate. I'm an investor. I don't want title to transfer, because what would happen to the property taxes if title transferred right now?
Well, we would go off of the new purchase price.
Would it go up a little, or would it go up a lot?
Oh, it would go up a whole lot.
Yeah, probably 600 or 700%. So I don't really necessarily want all those new expenses. I want to control it. So a lease option gives me the ability to lease it. I can then sublease it for more. I'm making cash flow. I also want to be able to gain in the profits. So as it goes up in value, say to 8 or 9 or $1 million or $1.1 million or $1.2 million, I can still sell that house, because an option to buy is also an option to sell. I can sell that house for $1.1 million. Now, when I do, the original seller has to receive the remainder of what the contract has for me to pay them, but that's fine. I'm still making the overflow. And that's one of the benefits to an investor. A benefit to the seller. You know, some sellers are going to have a huge windfall of profit when they sell that home on a standard sale, and they're going to get hit or killed with income taxes. So in many cases, if the seller's agent understands the likely tax consequences for the seller, a lease option might make a whole lot more sense for them, because they aren't likely going to see that windfall. They can get a big profit now. So as a buyer pays a down payment, they can get a good profit now, and they don't have to pay tax on that until the contract actually closes. So there's two closings in a lease option. One at the beginning, where you go into the lease option, you do use title insurance, you use escrow, you do everything legal, it's all legitimate, and I give a down payment, commissions get paid, the seller can get a nice profit, not taxable, until the second closing, when I exercise my option and either buy it or sell it to a new buyer. Another benefit to a seller would be, for example, they can sell it for more. So let's just say it's worth $600,000 today, but we go into an agreement with a contract that says they're going to give them $650,000 for that house, because it's going to be worth likely more than that when I exercise my option. That's a great thing to do. The seller ends up with more money for the house. They can get a nice profit. And in many cases, they owe so much on the house, they're not going to get that much money back anyways. So it's a way for them to get more money in their pocket than maybe they might get if they sold it on a standard sale. And when a seller sells it this way, there's no tenant-landlord relationship. The buyer is responsible for everything. The buyer is responsible for all the repairs. There's a down payment and it's not a deposit. So you never have to give that back to the buyer. So another thing is if values go up and the buyer doesn't buy, well, the seller can then resell it for a higher profit. And during that period of time, the seller can actually make more monthly cash flow than they could if they rented it out, because you can have rent credit built in there. Rent credit, it just allows the buyer to be able to show more down payment. And you've also got a down payment, not a deposit. So the down payment is non-refundable. The seller can just turn around and sell it again. Hoorah! What a great deal.
And so what's the benefit to the buyer?
Lots of benefits to the buyer. And one big benefit to the buyer is it allows people who couldn't qualify for a mortgage today or buy a home today in a normal circumstance to buy a home. They can buy right now. Let's say that in most cases, you're going to do a lease option for a buyer because they have credit problems or they have another issue. Maybe they have a bankruptcy they're still in, or their bankruptcy has to expire, or they just finished a bankruptcy and they can't qualify in standard ways. It's going to allow them to be able to control real estate. They can buy a home on a lease option and they can control it in the future when their credit is better. They can turn around and exercise their option and buy it for that agreed upon amount. Lots of ways a lease option could be structured, but I always recommend it structured with an agreed upon sales price, not an open-ended sales price, but an agreed upon sales price. Some other benefits to the buyer is, hey, jumbo, no problem. You don't have different programs for jumbo. The interest rate's not going to change. You get that underlying rate that's already on the loan as far as negotiating the monthly payments that you have to make. It can be very little down payment instead of a large down payment. It could just be enough to cover the real estate commissions. That's a requirement, but it could be more, of course, to entice the seller, depend upon the market and what's going on there. You always put in the contract your first right of refusal. So let's say, for example, the value has gone down, and as a buyer, I've already put a lot of money into it. So I have in my contract first right of refusal. So let's just say at the end of the lease option or whenever, you've decided not to buy the property at that price. You also have a first right of refusal, which means if the seller then puts it on the market, finds another buyer, then they have to first offer it to you for that price before they sell it to that new buyer. That protects the buyer. There's all kinds of ways to protect the buyer and the seller in this particular situation. It can be beneficial for both of them. One of the big misconceptions out there I already talked about a little bit is real estate agents think they get paid their commission at the closing, at the second closing, not the first closing. And they don't realize when you use title and escrow, you really need to get paid on the first closing. You don't want to have to be involved with this. You don't want to wonder about it. You're going to do all your work up front. You need to get paid up front. And that's how this is done with properly with title insurance and escrow. And that's another challenge. Sometimes title and escrow don't understand this. So I have recommendations of who and where you should go for your escrow in order to make sure this is all done correctly. You can also have a monthly escrow or third-party trustee that manages the payments. In other words, the buyer will make a payment to the third-party trustee, and the third-party trustee will make the payment to the underlying loans. That's another way to protect the buyer. Hey, what if I'm paying the seller and the seller's not making their payment and they go into default? Well, then get a third-party trustee to make sure that the buyer's payment goes first to paying the underlying mortgage and the rest goes to the seller. But we talk more about that during the seminar that I've created on lease options. It's 43 minutes long. It's going to be available to you for free. All you have to do is subscribe to our channel and register for the show, and you'll have access to this for free. The whole 43 minutes on lease options. You also have all-inclusive trust deeds and land contracts as well. In fact, it'll be the entire program with every detail you could ever want, how to structure contracts, how to do all kinds of things. It answers your questions. But the biggest benefit to the buyer is they can get into the game of real estate ownership and control right now, and they don't have to wait. Lots of other benefits to the buyer too. Like I said before, a lease option might result in a lower monthly payment they have to pay because title's not transferring, and the seller has a benefit of a lower tax rate. So they can negotiate a better payment on a monthly basis. Yes, it's a lease payment, but it's not a rent payment. It's a lease payment. And you have possibility of rent credit, which would increase that payment, giving the seller more cash flow. But of course, the seller can sell the house for more than they might be able to in a standard mortgage contract.
So I have a question on this. Is this the same as a rent to own? Is this just a different name?
That's another term for what some people would call it. But, there's so many different ways that people, real estate agents and investors have structured the rent to own, that it doesn't really become what I call the most advantageous and the fairest and the most above board type of a situation. If you're going to do this above board and you're going to do this right, you're going to use title insurance, you're going to use escrow. There's going to be two closings. One closes. The first closing is when they sign the lease option agreement and down payment is paid, and the real estate agents all get paid at the first closing. That's a big misconception. People think they have to get paid at the end. That's not true. At the first closing, the real estate commissions all get paid, and there's never any reason for the real estate agents to get involved again. It's done. It's finished, just like any other real estate transaction. You're always going to be putting a down payment in, and that down payment can be used, higher down payment or a lower down payment, to entice the seller to consider this option. Now, as rates go up and as time goes on, if there's a correction, for sure, and we don't know that. I don't really expect it for some time from now. But nevertheless, this way of transferring ownership is going to become much more popular in the days to come and the weeks to come. In fact, this workshop was recorded in 2012, but everything's exactly the same. Nothing has changed. And you'll see that at that point, we were in a completely different market, and it'll talk about that as well. But we're going to see that market someday in the future. Could be a year, could be 10 years, could be 3 years, could whatever it is. But nevertheless, the market is the market, and this can solve problems that the mortgage transfer simply cannot do.
Okay, so as we're having this conversation, when I had mentioned the question about rent to own and lease options and how they're considered the same, when people think of rent to own, they think of a first-time home buyer that doesn't have what it takes to currently purchase in that very moment, right? Now that I'm hearing you, this lease option is a really great tool for people who wanted to get into the game of Airbnb. Maybe they're not too sure, they want to get committed. This is a way to purchase or take control of a home, Airbnb it for a year or two, whatever, depending on your contract, to see if that's even something you would want without having the full-on liability outside of that rental payment and whatever that commitment is for that option. Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely true. If rates go or if prices go up, you exercise your option and buy it or sell it at that time. If values went down, you just simply walk away, and all you lost was your down payment, which can often be less of a down payment than a standard mortgage transaction. So it gives the buyer some options. But you're absolutely right. That's a perfect example of an Airbnb option. And now, in this particular market where we are right this minute, which is changing quickly, you might have to entice the seller into accepting an offer. So in other words, if a house is for sale, it's $550,000, and you might find out from the seller's agent that the borrower owes $450,000 or $400,000 on this house. And you can turn around and say, okay, here, Mr. Seller, here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to pay you $575,000 for that house, $25,000 more. And I want to give you $100,000 down payment, which is non-refundable to me, or whatever. Maybe it's $50,000 down payment. Depending upon the market is going to, and the situation as to how you have to entice sellers to accept this, you're going to do that. You're also going to outline the benefits of tax benefits to the seller, because they don't pay tax on any of that money until the second closing when they exercise their option. So yes, it could very well be a great benefit to somebody who wants to buy an Airbnb, and the sellers will very often accept it if the seller's realtor understands it. The biggest problem is when the seller's agent doesn't understand it, because she's got to sell it to her seller. It's got to make sense. It's got to be safe for her seller. We're going to get title insurance. We're going to use escrow. We're going to get a large down payment. Talk about the benefits to the seller. They can resell it if the buyer doesn't buy it and make even more money. They don't have to pay tax on the gain right now. They can make more money in cash flow than they could ever make if they rented it out. The landlord-tenant relationship that they would normally have if they just simply rented it out. They're getting a down payment that's non-refundable, not a deposit that they have to pay back. That down payment can be enough to cover all the real estate commission fees, but also enough to cover any kind of repairs they might need to make if they have to take the home back. And if they do have to take the home back, they don't have to do a foreclosure. It's just simply eviction. Simple, easy peasy.
So how come everyone isn't doing this?
Well, how come everyone's not doing this? It's just simply because they don't understand it. The last time the lease option and the all-inclusive trust deed and the land contract were really popular were back in the Jimmy Carter years. And that's another benefit to the buyer in this particular situation too. When rates went up to 17, 18, 19%, why would anybody want to get their own loan to buy that house when the underlying loan is 5%? Or in this case, the underlying loan could be 3%. You can negotiate much better payments, but agents don't understand this. To be quite frank, lawyers don't understand this because the ones that did understand this are dead or retired. This is all new. We're going back into an area where we've been before, but the people who remember that, the people who were experts in that are dead or retired. So we are going to have to learn things that we've never had to learn before. Now I'm going to show a short clip of the actual seminar that I produced that's available online for sale, of course, the entire thing, but this, of course, is going to be free to the members of our community.
Chapter 3, the lease option and the lease purchase contract. The lease option and the lease purchase contract. I call this the foundation. The reason why I start out the video series with the lease option and the lease purchase contract is because I firmly believe that understanding the lease option and the lease purchase, even if you don't use it, is the basis for the foundation that you need to be able to understand all the rest of the alternative purchase and sales options. It was never intended to do that. They get a full real estate sales commission at the beginning, at the signing of the lease option agreement. I'll introduce you to somebody later that made a lot of money buying and selling using lease options. You often can find a much better deal as far as a monthly payment in a lease option payment versus a mortgage payment. This is not like renting. I like people to say, oh, in lease options. Isn't that like renting? Isn't that like rent to own? Lease optioning has nothing to do with rent. A lease option contract could include the purchase of the underlying loan either through an assumption or through an all-inclusive trust deed. Today in the real estate industry, whether you're an investor or an agent, you need to understand that you have to know a little bit about everything. And you'll be able to put together a deal that solves the seller's problem, solves the buyer's problem like no one else can. Once you do 1 or 2 or 3, you will be an expert, more so than most people in the country.
This will make you smile. Just a few weeks ago, this is the way the market looked.
Excuse me, is that apple for sale? Yeah, we're about to put it on sale right now, actually. Well, I'm in the market, so tell me about your apple. Why should I buy it? Nice try. Okay, people, here's how this is going to work. I have an apple here. The highest bidder's going home with this. I want all bids in the next 2 minutes, then we're closing it. Bidding starts at $5.
Feeling pretty confident there, huh? I mean, don't you think...
$10.
He said starting at 5.
15. Is this a new apple? Yeah, just listed. I'm pre-qualified. I'll pay cash. I got cash. 20. 30. 40. No, just make it 45.
Is it even worth that?
50. I don't know. Please, this is the 8th apple I've tried to buy.
Could I at least see it up close?
Nope, it's an apple. You know what it is. You either want it or you don't. I'll take it for 100.
What? I'm from California. It's the cheapest apple I've ever seen.
120.
Why did I do that? Why? I don't.
Boy, how times change.
Those darn Californians.